I'm Sabrina Wu, and I'm with the East Bay Community Foundation. I'm also on the steering committee of the Bay Area Asset Funders Network. And so East Bay Community Foundation is a place-based foundation serving Alameda and Contra Costa counties, which is where we are right now. And our charge is to mobilize our region's assets to advance our vision of an inclusive, fair, and just East Bay. So today's topic is opportunity zones, and I just wanted to open with a photo of a recent New York Times article on opportunity zones. And how many people here have either seen or read this article or similar articles in opportunity zones? Most of the folks in this room. Can I just get a volunteer to sort of share something that you're hearing or reading about in the press about opportunity zones, either positive or negative? I saw a lot of hands at the article.
Well, this wasn't a press experience, but I was at an airport where there was a developer, and we were chatting about where we were from, and I said, oh, I'm in Marin County, blah, 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 and he said, oh, there's an opportunity zone there, and we're just seeing all kinds of benefits with capital gains and so forth. And it was just a very different angle on opportunity zones than I thought I was understanding as, you know, we think about our work in local communities. So from the standpoint of sort of developers and real estate investors and people who are looking for, you know, capital gains, relief and so forth, he really saw it as an opportunity.
As the name might suggest. Okay, well that's, you know, a positive angle on it.
Well, I don't know if it's a positive angle on it, but...
Anything else that folks have heard or read about?
I understand that Michael Milliken is going to be one of the major investors in opportunity zones, so he can become rich again.
Right.
Okay, Greg said richer for those who didn't hear. Right, so this article, which got a lot of attention, basically talked about how opportunity zones, which were really created with the intent to stimulate economic development and job creation and housing development in low-income communities, really just have become this tax benefit for the wealthiest people, how people kind of associated with Trump are sort of the earliest profiteers off of the incentive. And so we're gonna, I think on this panel, offer some diverse perspectives on this issue and talk about both some of the community concerns that have been talked about in the press, but also some potential benefits that we believe that opportunity zones might be able to bring to communities that have really been underserved by traditional markets for a long time. So a little bit about opportunity zones. There are actually over 8,700 in the United States, and over 10% of those are in California alone. Here in the East Bay, there are 64 opportunity zones. So these are designated census tracts that governors had designated, and they're all lower income census tracts. And about half of the ones in the East Bay are right here in Oakland, in East and West Oakland. So there has been a fair amount of sort of local organizing and activity around this issue because of that. And there is a disproportionate amount of potential capital gains available to invest in opportunity zones here in California because of real estate, tech company stocks, etc. Okay, so a question I get asked a lot is, what is an opportunity zone? And so those of you in this room seem pretty familiar, but essentially this is a diagram that just shows how the money flows from the investor level into a qualifying opportunity fund, which then invests into either businesses or real estate developments that are located in one of those designated census tracts. And this is a timeline that shows how the tax benefit works. So Essentially, this program was designed theoretically to encourage patient capital to flow to underserved markets where it wouldn't necessarily go otherwise. So if you leave your money invested for the full 10 years of the program, you receive the maximum benefit, and it sort of goes down from there depending on how long you leave it invested. I spoke a little bit about the challenges Opportunity Zones brings to a region like the Bay Area that is already experiencing high concentration and growth of wealth, but also really deepening inequities, especially around race and income and other economic inequities. So this panel is really meant to show how what we need in order for Opportunity Zones to achieve their intended impacts is really collaboration across a variety of sectors. So from community, investors, government, funders, all these folks really have a role to play in working together and doing what they can from their vantage point to ensure that the opportunity zones actually benefit the communities that they're intended to benefit. Since this is a conference for funders, I thought I'd include a slide on potential roles for philanthropy. So often in opportunity zone trainings and webinars and events, what gets talked about the most is the role of philanthropy in de-risking investment. So there's a couple of ways that funders can do that. The first is through co-investing into funds, providing loan guarantees, and paying for the operating costs of funds. Philanthropy can also fund a variety of other pieces of the ecosystem that we saw earlier. So there is a lot of education and awareness building that needs to happen in communities so that communities can actually be organized and prepared for opportunity zone developments. There's a lot of capacity building and technical assistance that can be provided to potential entrepreneurs and businesses that could benefit from opportunity zone financing. There are various policy advocacy efforts happening right now, both at the federal and the state level. And there's a few other roles here as well, especially around reporting and evaluation, which I believe Greg will speak a little bit more about. So just quickly, and Nate on the panel is going to talk a little bit more about this, but one way in which East Bay Community Foundation is engaging is actually exploring, creating, and managing a qualifying opportunity fund. So this was a concept that was actually brought to us from a local government partner in Oakland that has done a fair amount of work in identifying what their values and priorities are for opportunity zones that are within Oakland. And they've also identified a number of pipeline projects that they feel are aligned with broader values of closing the racial wealth gap and preserving affordable housing. But they had, at the time that we had spoken, yet to identify a values-driven qualifying opportunity fund that would actually focus on this place and this region. So these are some of the goals and priorities of the fund that we are looking to create, potentially in partnership with Community Vision. And so the fund would have strong mission and equity criteria, it would have a community governance model, and it would be a way to engage stakeholders across sectors. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers today. So Greg Johnson is the Director of Place-Based Investments and Grants at the Rockefeller Foundation. As a member of the U.S. Jobs and Economic Opportunity Team, Greg works to help low-wage workers achieve economic stability and build a path to economic mobility using the levers of public policy and private investment. Ronald Flannery is a campaign organizer at East Bay Housing Organizations, and prior to come on board at EBHO, he served as a lead organizer for Maine's Healthcare as a Human Rights campaign. And Nate Schaffran leads Community Vision's lending to promote equity in our food system and economy as a whole. And he comes to Community Vision with over 15 years experience in development, lending, and social enterprise with a focus on food and agriculture. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg.
Awesome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Greg, I'm with the Rockefeller Foundation. I am a Mississippian who lives in Brooklyn, which means I believe in call and response. So I'm going to have a conversation with you all, and I hope that you'll loosen up a little bit and be a part of the conversation with me. Thank you, Sabrina, for the warm welcome and all of your help preparing to be here today, for extending the invitation, and for, quite frankly, making sure that like prep calls got on calendars and so that I wouldn't waste my 10 minutes this afternoon. Want to thank the Asset Funders Network, the California Endowment, for your leadership and your hospitality. I am so glad that you are all here today. We at the Rockefeller Foundation are very proud to be here. By way of introduction, at the Rockefeller Foundation, we fight for vulnerable families who have been locked out of prosperity at home and around the world, making sure that innovation empowers all of humanity to rise. Here in the U.S., our work is focused on benefiting America's low-wage workers. That's 39 million households, representing about 90 million people, where at least one person is working full-time, often at multiple jobs, but they still have trouble paying their bills each month. Between the cost of housing, food, childcare, transportation, healthcare, taxes, and other expenses like a cell phone or broadband services, which are necessities nowadays, their wages are just not enough to make ends meet. When it's tough to get by, you know that it's even tougher to get ahead. Income equality is as bad as it was before the Great Depression. Tens of millions of working Americans are working hard, playing by the rules, but the American dream feels more out of reach than ever before, and for many marginalized communities, it was not very accessible to begin with. In the face of these realities, we all have a path to choose. We can choose to let those inequalities drive us apart. We can be cynical, we can be angry with each other, which sometimes we see in our politics, or we can choose the more difficult, but more worthwhile path of coming together, of offering everybody a chance to participate in the growth and investment and opportunity, and seeking to help the most challenged communities in particular have ladders to opportunity. That's the path we've chosen at the Rockefeller Foundation on Opportunity Zones, to try to make the law work for working families as it was intended, to bring together civil society organizations as best we can, to work with mayors, to work with investors, to work with community-based partners, to try to have more projects that amplify social impact and fewer examples of wealthy developers benefiting from projects that they would have done anyway. We believe that there are thousands of inclusive projects that can create hundreds of thousands of jobs around the country to benefit local communities if we get this right. So our goal is to make sure that this provision of the 2017 tax law, which provides tax incentives for investors to invest in lower income designated communities, will in fact help lift the people who live and work and go to school in and depend on those communities, and not just the investors who often live elsewhere. Nationwide Opportunity Zones still stand to bring billions of dollars into 8,700 designated zones across America. Neighborhoods where people of color make up nearly 60% of the population, where the poverty rate is more than double the national level, and where the unemployment rate is more than triple what it is nationwide. This investment does come at a cost. It's a part of a $2.3 trillion tax law Congress passed 2 years ago. And let's be clear, most of that is a giveaway to wealthy individuals and corporations. The vast majority of its advantages go to the small, privileged few. Nonpartisan tax policy experts have estimated that in less than a decade, 83% of the tax bill's benefits will go directly to the 1%. So the opportunity zones are part of the tax bill that is a rare exception. It's a bright spot because it does have the potential to benefit low-income working Americans. Of course, there are no guarantees. As many of you will attest, the Opportunity Zones train has already left the station, meaning that this tax policy is and will continue to transform American cities for better or for worse. This tax incentive doesn't have the regulatory safeguards that often come with state, local, or federal funds. If we don't step up together, it's easy to see how Opportunity Zones can actually make problems worse. Investment dollars may go where they're not really needed. Community members may get ignored or displaced, or development projects may not make a difference in the lives of the most vulnerable workers and families. We know in some cases, as evidenced by the article, this is already happening. Some investors are focused only on what the tax incentive can do for them and not what it is supposed to do for distressed communities. But that only reinforces why we're fighting for a different outcome, for a fair economy, and for fair tax policies that shrink inequality instead of growing it. We're fighting to make sure opportunity zones, as Dr. Shaw says, lifts all boats and not just the yachts. That's why we've supported the Opportunity Zones reporting framework, a framework we created with 20 other major U.S. foundations and impact investors. It's voluntary because we're a foundation, not a government, but we encourage everyone who invests in OZs to join that reporting framework and publish the impact of your investments and your developments on the local community, because data and transparency is a big part of making sure we're helping people who actually live and work and go to school and raise their families in these communities. We also continue to work with Treasury and others in DC to see if we can improve the reporting requirements and standards going forward. Earlier this week, Treasury released its first round of regulations requiring reporting from the field. While this is a win, there is no guarantee that that reporting will translate out or be available to the community, which means there is still more work to do. Moreover, when we asked cities to list their top priorities around opportunity zones as a foundation, across the board, they said their goals were to avoid displacement, to create affordable housing, and to build wealth for low-wage workers. So in partnership with 6 cities across the country, Oakland is one of them, Atlanta, Newark, Washington, D.C., St. Louis, and Dallas, Texas, we adopted those same goals. From promoting more affordable housing to supporting diverse small businesses that are led by and build wealth for community members themselves. We launched the Rockefeller Foundation's Opportunity Zones Community Capacity Building Initiative. That's a mouthful. I'm going to just say CCBI going forward. Okay? To equip local governments and empower community leaders to make this tax incentive work for the residents that they serve. And we'll work together to measure our impact, not by the number of real estate deals that close, but by the number of real lives that are actually changed for the better. Through this initiative, each of the cities will receive more than $900,000 in grants to support services over the next 2 years. The biggest commitment is a $400,000 grant for each of the cities to establish a Chief Opportunity Zone Officer who will work directly in each mayor's administration to drive responsible economic development in these 6 cities' opportunity zones. It will also support 2 community engagement specialists in each city to help ensure local residents and small business leaders are involved in proposed OZ projects and businesses at every step. At all 4 cities, all 4 cities will also receive support from our Opportunity Zone Technical Assistance Team, which is led by national experts with local experience from LISC and BCT partners to help develop project pipelines that balance the interest of investors with the needs of community. In similar form, to leverage our investments in opportunity zones, we've also created the National Opportunity Zone Academy in partnership with Smart Growth America to foster a supportive network that will help city leaders make sure investments in their opportunity zones are equitable. The Academy has 3 components. The first is technical assistance, providing in-person workshops and virtual discussions for city leaders and officials who work on economic development, planning, and community engagement. These workshops will be tailored to the city's needs and the challenges they face on a daily basis. For example, a city planner in Seattle or New Orleans might get help finding a path to change land use regulations, to incentivize new developers to build affordable housing instead of luxury hotels or low employee self-storage facilities. Second, there will be a program led by Locust to match local investors with city leaders. Locust is a triple bottom line coalition of real estate developers and investors. Our partners there are working to build a national database of city leaders' requests for proposals, and later will facilitate in-person engagement based on those proposals. Third, Locust will create a peer exchange network So cities participating in the academy will be able to connect with and learn from their peers in other cities in the network. Taken together, our ambition is for the entire academy to become the preeminent hub for people focused on sustainable development in America. That's why our partners will work closely with individual city leaders to make sure it evolves to meet their needs rather than the other way around. As a final testament to our work together, I want to close with a few words about the kinds of projects we want to see in opportunity zones. It's not just a commercial space, but a community space. It's a minority-owned business that hires with diversity and inclusion and the local neighborhood in mind, and is dedicated to lifting up vulnerable families, which makes it the kind of organization we like to work with at the Rockefeller Foundation. And it provides not only decent wages, but vital benefits like full health insurance, paid vacation, paid sick leave, and a 401k plan. When we made our announcement about our Opportunity Zones programming in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago, we did it at a local community restaurant, Busboys Poets. 5 years ago, Busboys Poets founder Andy Shalal announced his plan to open a new location of his bookstore restaurant in Ward 8 east of the Anacostia River. When his plan became reality earlier this year, he described his mission this way: we try to step very gently where we're going. We don't parachute into a community. People want to see things they feel they deserve or feel left out of, like a nice coffee shop or a nice hangout or a place to do work outside of their home or office. These are things that have been missing. And that's why all of us are here today, stepping gently, helping fill in what's been missing, looking out for Americans who feel left out. That's what we hope to do together, working hand in hand as good partners with all of you. Thank you.
This is the second time I've heard Greg talk about all the efforts that the Rockefeller Foundation is up to, and for me, I don't want it to end because I think it's really encouraging to think that there's that much being done. And as someone looking at it from a local level, at the community level, I think it's encouraging to know, that there are folks taking it this seriously and doing this much on it. And yeah, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Ronald. I work at East Bay Housing Organizations. It's local work here in Oakland and across the whole East Bay. And yeah, I think I'm going to just try to speak to how we've been approaching our Opportunity Zone advocacy, some of our goals, how we brought this to the community and what the community's concerns are. And yeah, I think it's really interesting because especially here in Oakland, Bay Area, working in housing justice, I think there's this really great acknowledgement and understanding of racist federal housing policy and how it has shaped the Bay Area. It's one of the things that makes it a joy to work with a lot of the partners in this room. And I would just say that, as wide-eyed and educated as we are about our past, I think we have to be able to recognize and see our past when it's showing up right here in the present, right? And opportunity zones, I think we have to just be really critical of what is the source of this and acknowledge that this comes from the most racist administration that we've ever had, or at least that we've had in the 21st century, right? Yeah, just the way that Trump and Ben Carson talk about opportunity zones as a solution, I think is scary just in and of itself. And so I think taking it with that grain of salt, understanding how federal housing policy can create such inequitable development outcomes, and understanding too our own history of displacement and gentrification, and taking that really seriously. The other thing that Sabrina mentioned that I think is important to bring back up is that California has more opportunity zones than any other state, and that those actually came from Governor Brown. And so you have a kind of a collaboration of a kind with folks who want development to happen in low-income census tracts, but who maybe don't have the most open heart when it comes to the people of those places. And so I think this is where one thing I really wanted to start with is just how we are defining community in our work, and being really centered on doing community development on behalf of the people who live in those communities. And I think opportunity zone development and luxury development, market rate development in the city of Oakland and all around the Bay Area has revitalized all different neighborhoods, but it has rarely served the longtime residents of those communities. So when we go now into those communities, trying to just raise awareness about what's coming down the pike in opportunity zones, I think we try to lead with this idea, this acknowledgement of the threat of opportunity zones, and just so folks know, this is, I think, going to be start to get messaged a lot more frequently by community advocates as displacement zones. The Right to the City Alliance is going to come out with a webinar tomorrow, and they're going to have a report that really frames this in that context. We don't want to go into communities and just say, hey, everybody, be afraid, be very afraid, right? Because that's not the best way to build a movement for housing justice. But so I think our work so far has looked like a couple of different listening sessions and workshops in district and here downtown, where we've invited folks to talk about what are their biggest needs in their community, what do they want to have developed there, and then talk about opportunity zones in a kind of a hopeful way, with the sense of if we can create local protections here in the city of Oakland, and we can move with a strong coalition from the bottom up of people who understand what this law is all about, we could actually glean something for ourselves and the kind of development outcomes that we really need, especially in East Oakland. And I think, with some of those goals, it's a lot of the things that Greg mentioned too, things like uplifting minority business owners, especially Black business owners in the East Oakland Black Cultural Zone, creating community ownership, right, that takes housing off the market and, helps us create the alternative future, right, that where land is no longer subject to speculation. And that's where I think we've gotten to some of the most beautiful ideas that we're trying to fight for, with things like, if we were to create community ownership, what do we do then with those spaces, and can we use those spaces as shelter for the unhoused, or can we use those spaces to invite displaced tenants back to East Oakland? So just to know that there is this threat, we do take it seriously. We're thinking of this as potentially the last phase of displacement in Oakland, but we're going into the community with a hopeful message of what we can win. And I think Oakland especially is uniquely positioned here, and I already alluded to this, because of the intense and unique experience of displacement that we've already experienced here. City leaders from all different sectors and allies again from all different sectors. I think we have different values, I think, from that experience, and I'm really hopeful that here in Oakland we can pull together and create local protections that allow for opportunity zones development without displacement. I think just to come back to some of the other pieces here about how we message around opportunity zones, because it can be really technical, and we can get really into the weeds with this. I think what we really need is community engagement and from the bottom up, but when we were talking about it with folks, we're trying to lean away from mastery and of the technical pieces around like the capital gains investment and all those things, but we still need that capacity as organizers to know what solutions make the most sense to fight for. And it's actually been really tough because these are so technical for us to have the capacity to not just understand it as community organizers, but to be able to then translate it back to folks and come together on, this is the solution we need. I think about some of the different sessions we've had where we've just thrown every idea up on the board, things like a local zoning overlay or tax increment financing districts and all these things that I'm not an expert in. And so it's been interesting, difficult, I'd say, just that there is not that much capacity. I think opportunity zones are, in the future, we're going to look back and we're going to remember that this happened in these years. And I just noticed myself that we're not being proactive in an advocacy space on putting resources to this really important organizing. And so the way it looks now is really just, I guess, fast and loose, and people who don't really have a lot of, time to dedicate to this, and just trying to pull together any allies that we can. And so I think it's just a chance with an audience like this to just further highlight how important it is to invest in advocacy organizing efforts, because on our own, we don't have the resources, and so much of the work, especially in nonprofits, is driven by what the funding tells us that we can work on. And so having funds that allow us to be really nimble in responding and being able to commit to a campaign like this locally, I just think worth mentioning, because I see a real lack of capacity from that advocacy space here locally. Excited to hear about the East Bay Fund, and I think that that's another just approach. Our strategy has been very sword and shield in terms of wanting to promote the alternative community funds, as I think this has been in partnership with Sabrina and Community Vision. This is a way that we can have the development outcomes that we most want, and then thinking of how can we make these alternative funds or these community-oriented funds competitive with the luxury market funds, because I just assume most capital gains investors are always going to want to put their money into the fund that has the highest market returns. And so if we have alternative funds that are aiming for community development outcomes, things like community ownership or affordable housing, what are the ways that advocates on the bottom can fold these into our campaigns so that we're making those competitive. So interested to hear about it. Gonna flip it to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate that perspective. And so we've alluded to some of the ways that this could go dramatically wrong, right? We've talked about some of the bad actors, the Michael Milkens and Jared Kushners of the world, who are already moving large quantities of money into opportunity zones. Talked about opportunity zones as displacement zones, and all that's really real. And Oakland, in some ways, is under threat more than most cities, because Oakland has the largest number of opportunity zones in which property values are already appreciating. Take a minute to understand what that means. The benefits for an opportunity zone investor come from the foregone capital gains tax, for sure, the deferment and then the forgiveness, but they also come from what they make on the underlying investment. And the easiest way to do that is to buy property, improve it, and sell it after 10 years. And if you're just sort of looking around for where in the country is there an opportunity zone where I can get a tax credit for making an investment that I would otherwise have made anyway because it's really profitable, you would put money into luxury condos or warehouse space or whatever in Oakland, and you would probably be buying up existing affordable housing or community land space. And so there is this kind of a defensive play here. Even if we don't love the concept, it's coming, and we need to be thinking about how we could direct it to the best end. So what if I suggested that while there are these bad actors, there is also an existing delivery channel of financial services providers with a track record and a mission of investing in low-income communities for the purpose of building up existing low-income communities, their political power, their social power, their economic power through affordable housing, small business, and nonprofits. There is a channel like that. It's the CDFI industry, Community Development Financial Institutions. So there are, in this country, over 1,200 community development financial institutions that already manage $185 billion for the exclusive purpose of doing community development in and with low-income communities. Most of those CDFIs, like our own, are nonprofits. So I'll tell you a little bit about ourselves. We are a 30-plus-year-old organization that was founded in 1987 in the Bay Area, sort of as a community-driven response to redlining, almost a direct public offering before that was the concept, just people getting together and saying, all right, we want to take our money out of banks that are predatory lending and hurting our communities, but what can we put it into? So we have, over the last 25 years, deployed $50 million just here in the city of Oakland in 84 loans, and that's been really community facilities for community-serving nonprofits like East Oakland Youth Development Center, Destiny Arts, Girls Inc., Restore Oakland, the Fruitvale Transit Village with Unity Council. So all of these are the kind of anchor nonprofit facilities that provide services and help to hold the community together. And while we don't often talk about nonprofits as a vehicle for opportunity zone investing, there's no reason that those underlying real estate investments, the buildings, couldn't be structured as an opportunity zone. We also do a lot of affordable housing finance, so with partners like Ubaldi and Saha, the Oakland Community Land Trust, East Bay Housing Organizations, and an emerging cadre of particularly people of color-owned land trusts and alternative structures for keeping land in community control that aren't just kind of traditional, federally subsidized multifamily affordable housing. And we are doing more and more around building up the economic power of lower-income communities, which is really a key to preserving communities in the face of displacement and gentrification. So we're managing a new fund called the Real People's Fund that was created by a network of community organizing groups, AFN and originally Casa Justa and Communities for a Better Environment and Restore Oakland. And these are community organizers whose purpose is base building for political empowerment, and who realized that without an economic empowerment strategy, at this rate in 10 years, they weren't going to have a community to organize. Right? So all of these things, economic development through small business, affordable housing, nonprofit facilities, all of them are things that community development financial institutions are investing in already and have the potential to invest in for opportunity zones. There's some other advantages to CDFIs getting involved in opportunity zones. We have all of this kind of community connection, community roots. We have the expertise around real estate, but we also have the framework for identifying and screening and evaluating impact investments through an impact lens. So not just the outputs of how many jobs do we create, how many people, housing units do we create, but the more intangibles of what kind of power and wealth is built for people of color, what kind of organizing strength is built through this. So many of the facilities that we have invested in, we do that not just because they provide a direct service, but because they're an anchoring and a convening space, like Restore Oakland, which holds restorative justice circles for people coming out of incarceration, but also provides job training and also is a community meeting space. So we see a need, a defensive play. We feel like we and other CDFIs have something to bring to the table. We're also a little bit skeptical for a couple of reasons. So one is issues that are kind of our issues. We and most CDFIs are lenders, and for those in the finance space, lending and equity investing, which is what opportunity zones are really fundamentally different kind of skill sets, policies, legal documents, but also just kind of ways of looking at the world and at transactions. And they're also, in a lot of cases, opposed to each other in a specific deal, so it's very hard to be a lender and an equity investor on a single transaction. But so the bigger set of issues, and this is where I'm really interested in everyone here, to the extent that you're involved in this, thoughts and feedback, just have to do with the structure of the program and whether it really works for these kinds of investments. So a few things that we're concerned about. When we've had some initial conversations with opportunity zone investors, even those who come to us and because they are interested in doing this right, they're sort of market rate return expectations, IRRs between 8 and 15%, depending on whether you're doing preferred debt or preferred stock or common stock. And we do not think that many of these projects are going to throw off those kinds of returns, not without some source of subsidy. And so a big question for us is, are there opportunity zone investors, people who've got a capital gain, who are willing to trade off a little bit of financial return for impact? And I'm not totally convinced on that score. Another one is just the scale, right? So the scale of what the community needs and the scale of what investors are thinking about on an individual transaction level, because what the community needs in a broad sense is enormous. But if you're talking about buying a property, fixing it up, we often hear opportunity zone investors talking about $50 million being kind of a standard project size, right? That's large infrastructure, big development, buying and redeveloping city blocks, putting up some of the towers that are going up all around us here in downtown Oakland. And community organizations doing affordable housing are often thinking in terms of hundreds of thousands or $2-3 million. So, you know, is there a strategy here where it's a multi-asset fund that's investing in multiple projects? There's some challenges around that because you have to deploy so quickly. So that gets to, I think, another potential challenge for doing opportunity zones right, which is the timeline around it. So the legislation sort of has this ticking clock of once you realize the capital gain and once you put it into an opportunity zone fund, you have to get it out there and deploy it quickly. And you know this better than anybody. Community development projects take time. They take time because you're bringing together different partners, because you're cobbling together different sources of financing, because you are going out to the community and engaging around design and what's needed, right? So if somebody was saying to me today, I bet that the insiders who were aware of the legislation coming were already buying up properties, so they would have shovel-ready projects, right? They had control of the land and can start moving. We're going out to East Oakland and trying to figure out where are there landowners who might be able to host the project? Where are the black churches who've got excess land? And then who are their nonprofit developer partners, the land trusts? And then who is there that can act as a project developer and put together the capital stack? And to go from that level of engagement to money's out the door and we're building a building in 18 months is a real challenge. So it's not, it's by no means a slam dunk that even if we all want to do this right and have the best intentions, we can make it work given the structure of this program. But where it has, and this is what I'll close on, the few examples you can see around the country of, I think, high road opportunity zone funds, Blueprint Capital comes to mind, which is in Austin, Accelerator for America in Kentucky. It really is a really intense multi-stakeholder partnership where a bunch of people come together quickly with really clear expertise. So there's some partner usually that is the developing the pipeline of projects, working with the community on design and needs assessment. I think that's a good role for CDFIs. There's often a more traditional asset manager, a fund manager that has all of the legal and financial back office and can do that quickly and at a low cost. There's often a real estate consultant, and we do, in the Bay Area, we're fortunate to have community-minded real estate expertise. So I think if we do pull something together, it's going to be a question not just of East Bay Community Foundation raises the money and we go out and deploy it, but we all figure out what's the partnership, including maybe partnering with some of those existing national opportunity zone funds that are building a backbone where we can each bring the thing we do best.
Great. What have you guys pass me?
Thank you. We're going to transition to some questions, and I'm just going to kick us off with the first question for our panelists. So from where you all sit, where do you see the biggest funding gaps currently and needs in the opportunity zone ecosystem?
Awesome. I briefly mentioned earlier that earlier last week we got the first round of regulations from Treasury that actually require any reporting from funds. The complication with that is that they're absent FOIA requests and lots of other I'm a recovering lawyer, I don't want to go back down that wormhole, but absent a very expensive and complicated litigation, it might become very troublesome to be able to access that data from Treasury. So one of the huge gaps that remains is actual reporting about what's happening, because absent reporting, we won't know whether or not we're driving towards social impact in any particular community. And even if we cobble together from private, from publicly available, and even if we develop some community assessment tools that inform a data collecting space, it is still going to be very difficult to include tracking fund flow. And so there is a huge gap in the field to pull together people to create a national data hub, to create the kinds of models that would do this. Ideally, you would need to have an institutional partner who could survive the timeline, the 10-year, 15-year cliff, right, to continue to process this data, but you also need partners at the table who have content expertise, and also people at the table who are going to be vigilant about guarding for equity across all other principles and practices. And so the need for a national data hub and people to invest there is a very, very real gap. The other gap that we will acknowledge as a foundation is that as a part of our CCBI, we are providing two vistas to support community engagement across those communities, but there has to be really strong investments in the ability of community to build the capacity that they will need to be able to become the architects of what happens in their communities as a result of this policy, and not the objects of the policy, if that makes sense. And so investing in capacity, investing in a data hub, and also there needs to be an intentional, what we would call a national network exchange, or a national community of practice for people who are focused on how to utilize the tool to produce equitable results, so that the first players on this field can talk to each other, can learn from each other, can talk about what's happening in similarly situated places or different places, to really leverage what's happening across places, to make sure that we are, we are literally building a plane and flying it and trying to get people seated, you know, and figuring out that we don't have enough fuel in the tank to get, you know, to get to the next destination. And so those are three gaps that immediately come to mind when from my perspective, in my city.
I'll say, in thinking about like the local work and our own campaign here in Oakland, it's really funny. We need more we need more allies, we need more organizing energy around this. And I just think about something that you had just shared too, and something that's really been on my mind about how CDFIs and community alternative funds, they ask investors to trade market returns for development impact, right? Which is, there's a lot of really allied investors that would maybe make that choice, but I think if you just float it out there, you can't expect 98% of investors, right? They're going to choose the market returns. And so I've been really focused on here in Oakland, how do we add into the ordinance that we've been working on some sticks, right, that discourage disembedded market and luxury development in Oakland's opportunity zones. And I think we've looked at it as we could create a zoning overlay over all of the East Oakland opportunity zones that discourages luxury and market rate development. But so far, because we don't have enough organizing power behind this, it's really looked like what will the city give us? And I think the city of Oakland, and I'm sure this is true of almost all American cities, is much more willing to do symbolic gestures that kind of show that what their values are and what they care about. But when it comes to putting their money where their mouth is, or adding in carrots that discourage luxury development, cities are very reluctant to do that. It has to do with what is the development goals of the city leaders, right? And especially in East Oakland, we have city councilors that want the investment, right? They want the rising per capita income. They want the rising land prices. So all this to say that we need a lot more power to be able to implement sticks into any local ordinance, and I don't think we're going to have that power without more investment in our nonprofit advocacy and organizing. So if that makes sense for folks, I think that's a big need.
that really rings true. And I think one other gap perhaps is solving this chicken and egg problem of are there investable opportunities or is there investment interest? When you talk to potential investors, they say, show us a pipeline of potential deals that we could put money into if we set up an opportunity zone fund. And on the same time, when you're trying to construct a pipeline, you need to know what are people's expectations and what kind of returns are they looking for and how much money is there really. And so there's a need, especially with this sort of ticking clock of the timeline to deploy once you raise the money, there's a need to go out there and engage with people who might have projects in community that has land, housing developers, and start to construct that. Here are 10 viable, we've run the numbers, we've penciled this out, this could work as an opportunity zone investment. Here are the tangible development impacts in terms of affordable housing units or avoided displacement, and present those to investors. But that's work, it's time, it's expense, and it's not really clear who would house that or fund it.
So I'm going to open it up to the audience now. Just raise your hand if you have a question to ask. Okay, I see one hand.
Well, I have a lot of questions. God, it just sounds horrific. Just a clarification that I wasn't, I haven't been able to adequately interpret, but can any of these investments be capitalizing a business, or is it all real estate? It could be, okay, because then I don't think
Operating businesses.
yeah, we haven't talked about the fact that it could be capitalizing a business. So what is the approval process for projects that are going in under this, and how transparent is that approval process, and what's the ability for the community to give input? And then, is there any clawback provision if we don't have any regulatory reporting? And I know the IRS is just going to be looking at the time clock, and if they keep the money in for 10 years, they get their taxes forgiven, but is there any clawback provision if they don't produce any social good? So no clawback. And then how about the approval process and the ability to give community input? How transparent?
There is no designed approval process for projects that a qualified opportunity zone fund would technically invest in.
So who is looking at it? The city? Is that the only?
And so I was going to say that a part of our calculation in creating the CCBI was that we thought it would be important that there was a person inside the city who was doing that, right? Who was coordinating community voice, small business voice, matchmaking potential investors with potential pipelines of deals. Our term is Chief Opportunity Zone Officer. Oakland has one who started a few weeks ago. That person, a part of their work is to do the things that you're saying, because the understanding is, not the understanding, the law does not require that it gets done, but it is a part of the capacity that's going to be necessary if communities are going to be able to use this tool to actually benefit the community and not just have it be, invest.
But where's the lever? The lever is zoning, permitting, and
Yeah,
nothing?
that's...
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, but I think, those are all the different levers that we want to focus on. We've been focused on local solutions, so thinking of how can we expedite fees and waive, give you like a concierge to help you through if you're proposing to build something that is good for the community. So basically incentivizing as best we can by waiving fees and making the permit process easier. I think the idea is the inverse can also be true of how you discourage luxury and market rate development, is using those same things and having higher, I think what we really like the idea of is higher taxes locally in step with the federal tax breaks that you get. And I think it's just, there's a lot of challenges to how we get that. And I was just going to shout out to Sabrina in the way that you, in the East Bay Fund, you have that community governed component. I think that's really visionary and important, and how we create development without displacement would be to give communities some say over what gets built where. There's just there's no city that has given a community that kind of a power. And so I think it's really cool that in the alternative fund that you all are putting together, that you've placed that there as a piece, and I think that can, and the outcomes from that kind of community governance, I think, could be a model for what the city should do and help us fight for that.
And really quickly on that, I just want to kind of highlight that this is not accidental. This was the design of the program, right? Like, so most federal tax credits, Newmarket's tax credit being an example, you have to have a community benefits agreement. You have to have defined community outcomes. You're measured against those. There's clawback of your tax credit if you don't produce them and you don't sustain them. And this was sort of designed almost as a reaction against Newmarkets and that structure, and saying, hey, you put the money in the community, that's enough. We don't need to know what you did with it. So I think all we can do here is the local political engagement, but there is potentially an avenue for federal regulation, right? And after the next administration comes in, to look back at the structure of the program. But the city's hands are in some ways kind of tied, because the city has no role to approve or disapprove an opportunity zone investment. If the city doesn't like it, and it doesn't run afoul of existing zoning or legislation, there's not a lot to be done. So far I think all the good work that you all have been looking at is on the how can the city provide preferential treatment to those projects it does want to see, and how can it telegraph to investors what it's looking for, which I think Oakland's done a nice job of.
I see a hand.
Well, I was just going to say that was exactly my question, Nate. It was about policy making, you know, how to tighten up those loopholes and how to make the statute better. Because it sounds like, and I have not read the statute, so I don't know the ins and outs. I used to be at the CDFI fund. So I know the Newmarket's tax credit worked on the first round of that at the fund. And so I don't know enough about OZs, but it sounds like it was written in a way, as everybody has said, to give preferential treatment to folks with, you know, enormous capital gains, with no interest in really serving distressed communities. So my thought was, you got to fix the policy at some point. Anyway, hopefully, I don't know how hard that is to go back and fix a, you know, tax policy of that magnitude. The other thing I just wanted to say is nobody's talking about investments in rural areas. You know, I'm only hearing about, you know, the 6 cities and the rural, you know, rural areas are always the last benefit from any of you know, these sorts of programs. I'm just wondering if anybody has any insights into what's happening in rural America vis-a-vis opportunity zone planning.
Sure. Our investments are concentrated in cities because the population we serve, 83% of them live in cities across the country. Nonetheless, we have partners like Opportunity Alabama, who is actually really engaged in building our rural strategy around utilizing opportunity zones. They have some support because their governor and their legislator passed incentivizing law that helps bring investment into the community. And so Alabama will cover any losses for potential investors who bring money into the state. The trade-off for that is that they have to adopt the state's reporting requirements and actually identify which social impacts they want to drive toward, right? And so across the country, and I'll also just say that there's a great diversity around where opportunity zones are located. And so a lot of us do talk about what's happening in cities. More than 20% of opportunity zones are in suburbs. Another 20 to 30% of them are in rural America, right? And so there's a great diversity in what places look like who are utilizing the opportunity zones. I think that across places, rural, urban, small cities, these are the places that have largely been overlooked and left behind. And so much of the challenges in getting someone to invest in rural Mississippi or rural Alabama are very similar, is what I'll say. And so I think that they're struggling with many of the same problems that the rest of us are struggling with this in cities across the country. I will say that across the Southeast, what is interesting is how tax law, which incentivizes corporations coming in by like being right to work and not allowing unions, all of the things that we wouldn't advocate for, are actually helping to bring in, to get investors to at least take an initial look in some places that they traditionally wouldn't.
Okay, I see a hand in the back and then Lisa.
Sure. So we've been talking a lot about the, somebody said the housing and development in cities, and I know a lot of that has to do with the the timeline and the desire for large projects and that they be shovel-ready. I'm wondering if you have any examples of projects that have happened that are around small businesses, anywhere in the country. And I know that there are funds that have been investing. Is there any example of how this works for small businesses?
You want to talk about the operating business rule?
You're asking about actual projects?
Yeah, just an example of an opportunity zone project that's invested in a small business as opposed to a real estate deal.
So I have well, I mean, it sparks an idea for me just that when we did our listening session in District 6 in East Oakland, it drew out a lot of local small business owners. There's this one cafe right nearby my home that's owned by two Latina women, and yeah, they want to make opportunity zones work for them. And just because it's the coffee shop right next to my home, I'm in there pretty frequently, and I'm in contact, and they're always asking for an update about how can they apply for something. And I've just been waiting on the alternative fund, because I just assumed that any kind of investment that would lift up those women would come from a community impact fund, and it hasn't launched yet. So I think that once it's available, folks can apply, and I don't know if Sabrina want to talk more to that.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is that we are still very early on in the process, so we're in year one of the investments that are being made. There are not that many opportunity zone projects that have actually gotten off the ground so far, and most of the early ones are the high return, low risk projects. What we've heard is that you really won't see those higher impact, small business investments and deals until later on in the process.
I'll just say a couple things. So you can invest in operating businesses. There are just a couple of challenges around that. One is the scale, right? So how many really community-based and community-serving businesses are there that are looking for capital at this scale? So the ticket size, and then the exit, right? So that's a challenge. So the way that I think the best way to do that through opportunity zones is some kind of preference shares with maybe a conversion feature to sell back to the management. So at least you have a structured exit. But then the problem is the value, the return expectation, right? Because that's not going to be your hockey stick unicorn kind of outsized return. So one thing that people are thinking about is small business incubators, right? That's potentially a way you could channel investment and services towards a greater number of smaller businesses, and your investment is in the incubator, which is maybe owns property, maybe has a facility, and then has a revenue stream. So that's one thing. You asked for examples. Accelerator for America has been involved in doing this, and they put together a pipeline of deals in Kentucky. And some of that's been around like really hyper, there's this interesting kind of street corner investing idea of like literally a four corner intersection and looking at multi-asset classes. So doing businesses and retail and housing, you know, but yeah, that requires having both businesses and other types of assets in one opportunity zone fund.
So I know Lisa had a question.
Hi, I'm Lisa Forty. I'm with First Five, and I'm interested in digging in and understanding a little bit more about the link with community benefits agreements and whether or not, because I know in Oakland we have not yet been successful in having a citywide community benefits ordinance, and I'm curious in cities that do have community benefits ordinances, is it playing out differently there? And in terms of a local policy opportunity, I don't know if people know, I was just Googling on my phone and like Detroit has one, so I'm curious what's happening there with that. And then I was also thinking about the role that public health can play with a stick, and I'm sort of curious, are there examples of where we're using like health impact assessments and other things like that as part of a local tool to create strategies around what's allowable and not allowable? And then I'm interested in understanding more about, this is a separate question, kind of about are there, I mean, foundations are good at avoiding taxes. Are there big foundations that are investing? Like, is there a different, I see what you're trying to do that is different because it's a community foundation model, but are there large foundations, por ejemplo, that are, I'm just sort of curious, are there, like, is Philanthropy trying this on for size to see, can we take a different kind of return? And then I also want to know who the Oakland chief person is. If you're allowed to say, yeah.
I can answer the last question. So, Oakland's Chief Opportunity Zone Officer, her name is Monica Edwards, and she comes with experience in affordable housing development, as well as actually our fearless leader of the Bay Area Asset Funders Network. I know used to work with her at Citi many years ago, so she has a finance and lending background. She's very accessible. She sits right at 250 Franco Gala Plaza, and you can probably find her contact info on the city's website. I took the easy question.
Sorry, I blah, blah, and avoid whichever ones.
I'll briefly answer the question directed at Philanthropy. I'll say that yes, that you are seeing some philanthropies put some skin in the game, right, by actually establishing funds. Some of us are providing funds to other qualified opportunities on funds. Early on, Kresge and Rockefeller did it, and a letter for request and seeded some funds, right? We continue to think about how to provide the technical support, the technical assistance and support that other members of the ecosystem might need to learn how to establish and structure funds, like those at CDFIs who are natural partners in this space, and some of how they got left out of the original legislation is its own laughable moment. And so thinking about that, so yes, the other thing that we have been encouraging our partners in philanthropy to do, which is something you reminded me of earlier when you were talking about particularly from the perspective of CDFIs, to create tools that de-risk deals, which will make it a lot easier to get done, and also to provide some of the capital to do some of the pre-work and assessments that are needed, which ultimately increase return on investment because people aren't spending that money to do it themselves. So yes, there are members of philanthropy who are putting some skin in the game, who are actually putting their money where their mouth is, making sure that there's no dichotomy between what we say and what we do. We could do a lot more of that, and the Rockefeller Foundation will be pulling together some national funders for a national convening to talk about how we can coordinate our play toward the end of this year, to think about how we can do more of that.
Oh, sorry. Well, one thing that you had said was thinking of the health and housing connection, and we have in Oakland, in EPO, worked in coalition with a bunch of other great organizations to create healthy development guidelines. Those are guidelines, and I think something like a CBA ordinance would be really cool because because it is so hard to track where it's happening. So a citywide ordinance that says any luxury development or market rate development that's totally disembedded from community benefit, that just can't exist in the city. And I think that's something visionary that would make a lot of sense to fight for. Just a note too on the health housing connection, like I think the healthy development guidelines that had the key insight of how houselessness and what it does to folks to not have a home, and how that is such a health aggravator. And I think most health networks that we work in coalition with understand that it's really the high rent, and it's this luxury development that's creating this health crisis. And so coming at it from all angles, I think our hope is to be able to bring everybody into a coalition asking for or demanding equitable development in Oakland opportunity zones. And so any health allies in the room, come talk to me.
Great. Yes.
I was curious if there are any analogous sort of learning communities in the Bay Area with, Bay Area city leaders and organizers and community development groups. I mean, the TA and capacity building and networking seems so critical to trying to understand what the opportunity really is. I was just curious if any structures have been established in the Bay Area so far. knowledge exchange, technical assistance and capacity building, you know, some of the work that Gregory mentioned Rockefeller is doing, it sounds like more on a national scale, but is there a Bay Area version of what was being described, or is that needed, or?
I know there have been convenings of funders around this issue, but I'm not aware of anything that's sort of structured and ongoing that is similar to the academy that Rockefeller is funding nationally. I don't know if, Greg, you know if it's in the scope for the COSO or LISC to convene any sort of community of practice in the places where those investments are happening?
Yeah, no, so they aren't required to convene a community of practice. They are required to vigorously engage in community, right? And so what that looks like will vary from community to community. But community should definitely be at the table designing what that process looks like. So community of practice, national network exchange is the foundation's language. We are not being prescriptive to people in place about what they need to do. I do think that it is beneficial. For instance, in Atlanta, they are building out a local community of practice around these things so that whether or not someone is receiving funding from Rockefeller to work on opportunity zones work, right, there's a larger community of stakeholders who are now sitting at the table, and I just want to make sure that they are pulling people together to coordinate effort, to be efficient, effective, and to really advocate for community voice. And so it is a practice that we endorse, but we have not required it across the places where we are implementing the CCBI. What we do require is very, very real and vigorous community engagement.
So we have time for just one more question, if there is one. Yes, in the back.
So I'm kind of curious, because in some ways this is like the chicken or the egg, and the one thing that we're not sort of fleshing out here is where's the money coming from and access to those high net worth individuals. We are here in the Bay Area where there's an IPO every day or a buyout. So where is this, where's the creation of this conversation, the intersection of this conversation about that the tax planners, the investment advisors, where's that opportunity to have the conversation with the money about what they're looking for, why this is a great alternative to treasuries, as opposed to needing this, market rate of return when, so how or what does that look like? And I'd like to know from anybody who's on the advisory side, what are those conversations like? Because just to say we have to have a market rate of return is probably, oversimplification versus what their portfolio looks like and what they could be doing.
So I'll try to answer your question, Lori. So I know that various networks of estate planners, financial managers, investment managers have been hosting sort of informational sessions for their members about opportunity zone legislation. I myself have not attended any of these meetings, but my sense is that it's a very different conversation from what we're having here, as can be expected. And so I think you're raising a really important point, is that there are various conversations happening in different sectors with different stakeholders, but to your point, there's not really like a central clearinghouse or space where those ideas are being exchanged across sectors.
One more plug, Monica's gonna hate me. But one of the roles of the COSO is not to broker deals. The lawyer, not brokering deals, right? But they are facilitating and matchmaking among investors, small business owners, and potential deal makers, right? So one of the resources that the city of Oakland now has is a chief opportunity zone officer who will not be brokering deals, but will be introducing small business owners and people who have real estate projects to potential investors, helping to create a deal box, collecting and aggregating information on potential deals from across the community, so that in her role, she can help facilitate some of the connection that's needed between people who have deals or people who have real estate projects or who have business operating deals that need to get done, and investors who actually have capital and care about double or triple bottom line investments.
We are unfortunately out of time. I know there's a couple of other questions, so hopefully our panelists can stay up here for a few more minutes, and you're welcome to come up and talk with us. But thank you so much for coming to this session, and some of us have cards up here, so feel free to grab one, and we'd all love to have follow-up conversations with each of you.